he knows he's been backed into a corner. He knows that he could really anger his base right now. And he's trying to control them. And he's also aware that they're not that loyal to him. Welcome to the Tara Palmeri Show. There's a war going on, not just in the Middle East, but within the Republican Party. Trump's MAGA base is a fragile coalition that was really formed just about 12 years ago, building off the Tea Party and attracting other politically homeless, some of them Bernie Sanders supporters, libertarians, mostly people with an anti-establishment streak. But the MAGA base was unified by one belief: America first. And it's the prism through which they see every policy, from immigration to the economy to foreign affairs. But right now, they're at a breaking point with President Trump, who they fear will violate their core principle by following Israel into Iran as he seeks to wipe out their nuclear capabilities. If MAGA's a cult, well, you're seeing them turn on their dear leader, and it's playing out right before our very eyes.
You don't know anything about Iran. So
okay, I am not the Tucker Carlson expert on Iran.
You're a senator who's calling for the overthrow of the government.
You're the one who
don't know anything about the country.
No, you don't know anything about the country.
So how does this affect the movement's standard bearers like J.D. Vance, Tulsi Gabbard, and even Marco Rubio, who are looking to 2028 to run for president? Will they be dogged by Trump's Iran decision the same way that Kamala Harris was dragged down by Biden's unpopularity? Will the Iran conflict sink the GOP's biggest stars? Take a listen here. Chuck, thanks for joining the Tara Palmeri Show. You launched the Chuck
I'm sorry
Todd
I'm not
show.
wearing red. I feel like I should wear red to be branded.
I know, that's the red letter,
red
which is the complimentary newsletter. You guys can sign up to get my exclusives. Go to tarapalmeri.com. Always plugging. But Chuck,
Yes.
you and I, we started this independent venture basically around the same time. So how's it going for you?
First of all, I have to remind myself, it is literally, I think, been 75 days.
Is it really?
It was April 1 was my first show. I think
Okay.
actually April 2, because I didn't want to start on April Fool's Day, right? Like, always be marketing, right? Branding. And there are days it feels like I've been doing it forever. And then it's like, and then of course you're like, I need to keep growing. And then you're like, hey, this is pretty good for 2.5 months. But at the same time, you're just like, I got to have more, right? So,
your metabolism is amazing. It's like, I feel like you and I are both on the treadmill together.
Well, I was just going to say,
Turning it
you're pretty high functioning yourself, like keeping up with you. Let me ask you this, because I'm guessing you have the same feeling. If there's the only downside is I don't know how to have downtime right now. Every time I have some downtime, I think, what else should I be doing?
Exactly. Or you're like looking at your numbers, or you're looking at your analytics, and you're saying, okay, who's watching, who's not, when do they stop? How do we make this better? Asking everyone for feedback. It's a loop in your brain. And I actually got some advice from somebody on this, and they were like, give it 6 months and chill the F out. And I was like, okay, I'm never going to take that advice.
And by the way, it's easy to give that advice to somebody else. I bet you that person doesn't practice what they preach.
Oh, of course not. But I'm having fun. Like, I really am. It's a great feeling to wake up on, what is it today? It is Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. I was on CNN last night, probably till midnight, wake up in this morning. Then I get to talk to you, Chuck. And I was like genuinely excited because, well, obviously the world's on fire. I keep saying that over and over again, but I don't know how to describe it otherwise. But
and there's a numbness to this, right? Like, that we're all feeling.
Yeah.
And it's like, and this is what the Trump era has brought us, right? Which is that he's weirdly made instability a stabilizer, which is just a strange feeling, right? It's like when you're on if you're on a roller coaster all day, eventually you stop feeling the loop-de-loops.
Yeah, you're not dizzy anymore. Dizzy is the normal. Like it's like when you get off a ship, you've been on a cruise ship. I don't know if you've ever been on a big boat before, or even a small boat, and you get off and you're like, why do I still feel like I'm moving? I don't like not moving.
Legs are a little rubbery, right?
Put me back on. Yeah. So that's where we are. It's really fascinating though, because I think this is one moment of instability that President Trump doesn't want to be pulled into, right? Like, he likes to create motion, move things forward, like on immigration. He wants the ICE raids. He likes the force. He likes the conversation being driven by him and always forward.
He wants but he also wants quick. He wants quick feedback, right? Quick responses, quick results, and
exactly.
the two places where you're not going to get quick results if you pursue a policy that succeeds. One is his tariff mess, which is why that's been a mess, because it isn't designed. His goal is not going to be quick. Like, even though he thinks, he wants that. And then what he thinks he's going to pull off with Iran here. There's no such thing as a surgical strike. This isn't, I grew up, I was mentioning this, I'm obviously a little bit older than you. One of my first sort of just normal sort of military memories of the U.S. launching a military strike was like I think it was 1983. Just remember being at my parents' friend's house, and we're watching Ronald Reagan come on TV to talk about these airstrikes on Libya. And it was like, yay, America, and it was done. And we didn't hear much about it after that type of mindset. And I think that's what Trump thinks he can pull off here.
But what about the bomb in Syria? Okay, the mother of all bombs he dropped in reaction to the war, chemical warfare in Syria. This was during his first term, and I know it was just on like an airfield. It wasn't the same thing as dropping a 30,000-pound bomb into a nuclear or uranium facility where they're building bombs below a mountain. But I mean, do you think he thinks that he can do it that way and just say, like, listen, remember when we dropped the mother of all bombs in Syria and we didn't actually put boots on the ground? We sort of just left it. We weakened the regime, and we actually saw some fall. We saw change eventually. There's a new leader there. Do you think he thinks that this is possible in Iran?
Oh, and I also think he believes, the Soleimani assassination, which ended up not, other than perhaps motivating the Iranians to singularly target Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, and even possibly President Trump for assassination. There hasn't been a huge backlash to that either. So no, I think he thinks he can sort of do this, that he doesn't, that there's no commitment here, that there's somehow going to be no long-term commitment. Good luck with that. I mean, that's, I think, the thing. I think he thinks that, and I think he thinks he can, and that's going to be what I think makes this a constant headache if they do, because, even if it works, well, then the aftermath is something we have to manage. You're not gonna outsource the aftermath if this all works. You're gonna have to be involved in this too, and that's not something he's gonna want to do. Yeah. So. This is a presidential decision, right? It's one of those, like, you get those decisions. There's nobody else can make it. He has to make it. I do think Netanyahu jammed him, right? He's in a corner. He doesn't like this. He's been jammed. I get it. He's looking at it. They've never had a better opportunity to potentially eliminate their nuclear program, right? Iran is weak. Their air defenses are down. They've never had a better opportunity.
And it's something he's wanted to do since 2011. He wrote it in his book.
But what if it doesn't work?
Right. Well, it's interesting, though. I was, listening to Politico's Nahal Tusi. She's Iranian, by the way. Still has family there in Tehran. She was talking about it on their podcast this morning. And, she mentioned something that we would know this as journalists. I wonder what you think, that often when sources say, especially sources of the administration close to the president, say he's considering a decision, it usually means he's already made the decision to do it and that they're just floating it at this point. Would you say that that's where we're at, or is Trump such a waffler, as he often does, that he really is truly considering it? Because this isn't a typical administration.
No, and there is, whatever you think of Trump, here's one thing that I think every voter should be happy about. There's a diversity of opinion in that situation room, right? There's not groupthink. Now, there may be fear of saying certain things because of, right, you don't want to make them mad, like Tulsi Gabbard, right? So that could sometimes, fear of telling the boss the truth can create groupthink, right? And there's possibilities that that's happening. But in theory, he's at least got a national security team that, frankly, is in conflict on this, right? Which is... Yeah. I think it's a healthy thing if this is a healthy debate. But how do you guarantee anything with him, right? I also, so there's a part of me that worries, and I'm curious what you think of this theory, which is Trump hates the taco meme, right?
Right.
Because it's kind of emasculating. How much does that, now that he's gone, he's gotten as close as he's gotten. If he doesn't do it, that taco meme takes on life. My fear is he may make a decision based on narrative and not based on facts on the ground.
I don't know. This one is such a hot point for the MAGA base. Mm-hmm. And it could really set them off the edge, off the brink. And like, it was so interesting to me to see what he said to Michael Scherer of The Atlantic when he was asked about this, about concern over really losing his base. And he seems to think, that they will be loyal to him regardless. Mm-hmm. He said, I created America first. I developed it, which is not true. As we know, it was developed back in like 1850.
But the TV there was no TV then. So if it wasn't said on TV, it didn't happen.
Well, then we'll give Reagan credit for it then. And say, he said, I'm the one who the term wasn't, let me quote him actually, because I think it's actually I know what you mean. Yeah, go ahead. It's a very defensive statement, in my opinion. Yes. I'm the one that developed America first. And considering that the term wasn't used until I came along, I think I'm the one that decides that. And so to me, it suggests that he knows he's been backed into a corner. He knows that he could really anger his base right now. And he's trying to control them. And he's also aware that they're not that loyal to him. There are other standard bearers at this point now. There are people like Tucker Carlson. There's Steve Bannon. They're his, perhaps predecessor, his successor, J.D. Vance, who obviously is in like the worst position he can possibly be in terms of his political future, but we can talk about that later. I just think, what do you think? Do you think that he could lose them? Are they really that loyal to him?
I think there's some he could lose. There's no doubt. And it's also probably good for the media, good for Tucker's business to sort of be to be the contrarian a little bit. In many ways, he built his business on contrarianism. But I think I wouldn't bet against Trump's ability to convince a majority of MAGA to be with him on this.
The online rage is crazy. Our producer,
it's not like, let me emphasize, underline that, online rage.
I know, okay. But like, my producer Eric, he comes from the right. And he tells me that it's not just people online, it's his friends. It's like there is one tenant, like the top tenant for them on top, besides immigration, is really staying out of foreign wars. And that was one of the most appealing things to them of the Trump doctrine.
And I think this has been a genuine thing. I mean, this was, just look at who paid the price for the never-ending wars of Iraq and Afghanistan. It was rural America. It was a lot of guys who signed up from rural America. Right. Frankly, it's right. The urban America and rural America. And in some ways that is the skeptical of these are in those.
And the whole point was to reject the Bush doctrine, right? Like that was the whole point.
So but there is don't forget, and this gets it to sort of the various factions in Trump's coalition, right? He acquired the evangelical base, right? It wasn't his, but he sort of acquired it. Iran is sort of a North Star for that part of the base. So, I think that, and this is where one is almost in direct contradiction to the other, right? There's, MAGA has that libertarian streak too, a little bit, which also feeds into the, hey, we'll leave you alone if you leave us alone type of foreign policy mindset. And which has never been comfortable with the evangelical wing. Right. There's always been clashes between that. Any right of center coalition has always included a piece of the evangelicals, a piece of the libertarians, and a piece of the and there's always been conflict between those two wings. And I think this one is where there's deep conflict because there's a lot of the evangelical base, which is still pretty important to his coalition and to a lot of Republicans, not just him, that also want this and don't want to be seen as abandoning Israel. So
he's been able to bring them along, though, the evangelicals.
Oh, I agree. And that's why I wouldn't underestimate Trump's ability to do this, which is also why, though.
I think they're easier to control, though, than MAGA.
That I agree with, because they have nowhere else to go. MAGA, in theory, could go somewhere else. Right? Yeah. They could go to Bernie. They wouldn't have a problem going to Bernie on some of these things. this is why I think we're going to have a bad outcome here. I think he's trying to find a middle ground, and there's no middle ground here, right? If you're going in, I don't know how you do this without regime change. And if we're successful at eradicating their nuclear program, well, essentially, we're encouraging regime change. And if we're not encouraging regime change, then we're also dropping the ball here. That's the problem with where the corner he's got himself backed into. I think if there's a deal to be made, here's what I do believe. If the Iranians are truly willing to go hat in hand here, he'll cut a deal with them and he'll preserve the regime. It's all about how much does that regime want to survive? How important is the nuclear program, and how important is it to that regime to survive? And there is where I do think and that's why I do think you're right. I think the drumbeat feels like it's if they've already pushed, that Trump's already getting ready to green light this. But I'm not ready. I do think he wants a deal. And
also, he's so
I don't know if
fickle.
the Iranians are I don't know if they get him, right?
Yeah.
They've not. It's funny, all the Gulf state guys have figured him out. And the Iranians haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah. But just think about Trump. I mean, he says at one point, I'm going to staple green cards on every single diploma of someone who graduates from college, right? He said that during the campaign on the All In podcast. MAGA freaks out. Within days, he's reversed it. Even on immigration, he said, let's make exceptions for farm workers. Which arguably are a big part of his base, right? Let's make
And
exceptions
the hoteliers.
Hotel, well, that one, he's a hotelier, yeah. Restaurateurs, knowing that can have a huge impact on the U.S. economy. And then he gets a little bit of pressure from MAGA and he reverses it right away. This one you can't reverse so easily. You can't go into
This
war.
is why I think
out.
I think he really does want a deal, because a deal is the only way out of this corner.
Yeah. Trump does not like long-term commitment. Just ask his wives.
Well, that's the problem here. It goes back to what I was saying before, right? In order for his goal of returning manufacturing and using tariffs as the tool to do this, you have to have patience.
Right.
Right. Donald Trump has no patience. So he wants all these short-term, it's why he loves the executive order and he hates having to work through Congress, right? He wants instant gratification, right? I've always said he really is a 13-year-old. He's Arrested Development. He, somewhere between the ages of 13 and 15, and he's the same. He's like the same psyche as any teenager on this, and he wants.
A lot of women would say that of a lot of men.
Fair. I mean, a lot of men have Arrested Development. I think I have finally made it maturity-wise into my early 30s. So now that
you seem like a very developed human being.
Yes,
you wouldn't make it this far, but who knows? I mean, he had to take Trump all the way to the White House, so clearly there are a lot of men who identify with him.
No, well, I actually have a thesis now on this, which is we forget how much society admires people who fake it till they make it.
Yeah,
we do admire it. We always have admired it. We don't like it until they make it. Like, we don't like fakers, but if they make it, we're like, hey, that's pretty good.
I mean, they literally tell you to do that. They're like, if you don't know what you're doing, fake it till you make it. Some of the greatest actresses, I mean, that's what they do for a living, is faking
Donald
it. But
Trump's
that's what they say.
whole professional life has been this. And it's, I think, is weirdly why he's so representative of what some people view as the American dream.
I want to talk about the 2028 crowd, assuming that President Trump does not try to run again in 2028. I know that they like to float that.
I know he's going to be 82.
Only
our buddy Steve
Bannon. It didn't stop Biden. Come on.
I know Bannon's convinced. I know you've talked to him recently, and so did I. I don't know if you caught the way he's worded this, right? Bannon simply says President Trump's going to be on the ballot. He never says where on the ballot. I'm convinced he thinks there's a VP loophole here. I don't buy it, but I think that's where.
Is that a possibility? Can you do that?
So I don't buy it. But look, the 12th Amendment unequivocally says if you're not constitutionally eligible to be president, you cannot be vice president. The 22nd Amendment came after the 12th Amendment. So that's obviously the 22nd Amendment is the 2-term limit. So it is, Bannon wouldn't share. He goes, I'm not going to tell you yet. You guys will pick it apart type of mindset, which really tells me they don't really have a plan yet, right? If they're not telling you their secret plan, it means they don't have one. They're still trying to figure it out. That's my take on him.
Yeah.
But if you were to the whole, I know it's a silly argument that doesn't mean someone isn't going to try to make it, and it doesn't mean some judge won't somehow agree with it, which is, well, the 22nd Amendment came after the 12th Amendment, and when the 12th Amendment was written, there wasn't a term limit, so he can be the running mate.
The irony,
and it doesn't explicitly say that there's a 2-term limit for vice president. So I don't buy it. I think if it makes its way to Supreme Court, it won't make it, and all those things. And I also think an 82-year-old man's not running for president. I
don't believe that. Men never, again, not to get into the psychology of men again, but they often need to be pushed out, as we've seen in Congress. How many of them are like?
I just read today, Danny Davis at 83 years old, he's an Illinois congressman, still thinking about running for re-election. You're like, what are you hanging on for? I mean,
Senator Grassley's in his 90s. He is in his 90s. It is insane.
So when I was a kid, it became the Bear Bryant effect. So Bear Bryant was this famous football coach for the University of Alabama. He finally retires. He died 4 months later. So it is Joe Paterno was a similar situation. He leaves the job. He's dead within 6 months. So there are a lot of stories that older folks share about that, like the minute
losing purpose.
Correct. All of a
reason
sudden,
to live.
It's So I do think it's fear of dying that actually keeps these people running again. I do.
I do want to get back though to the 2028 crowd, because obviously a lot of them are in his orbit and they can be dragged down by this decision. We've got Tulsi Gabbard, we've got Marco Rubio, we've got JD Vance, and of course President Trump is trying to, doesn't want to be a lame duck, so he's never going to anoint any of them. And he's like, I like JD, I like Marco, I'm never gonna, maybe he'll wait until the end to actually give the blessing to one of them.
You're hearing chatter that he's a little. I've heard some chatter from some of my MAGA sources that, Vance falls in and out of favor with the president.
He's always fallen in and out of favor with the president since he was chosen. I think he distrusts him. The funny thing to me is that so many of them are like turncoats. Marco trashed him, now on the inside. JD Vance wrote a whole book trashing him, now on the inside. Tulsi Gabbard, a Democrat, now on the inside. And someone pointed out that actually
even
Paul
Pete Hegseth trashed him in 2016.
They all did. I guess everyone did that's around him. But Paul Reichhoff, I was on CNN with him last night. He's a veteran. He was close with Tulsi, close with Pete. And he said to me, Tara, I'm telling you, Tulsi has no allegiance. And as we know, there's some reports right now that there's friction between her and President Trump because she's a dove. She put out this cryptic video last week about nuclear war. It apparently irked President Trump. She said in a congressional hearing that she doesn't believe that the Iranians are even close to creating a nuclear weapon. You could argue there's evidence that it could take them as much as 3 years, right? So she's obviously been brought back in. Trump said, I don't care what she said. He literally said that yesterday. I don't care what my director of national intelligence says to reporters. But yeah, I mean, they're thinking about their futures. Let's think as like political consultants for a minute. JD Vance. He's been backed into a corner. He has to defend Trump, but he is the standard bearer of the libertarian MAGA movement, more so than the evangelical, wouldn't you say?
Oh, 100%. He's the tech, whatever you want to call it, the techno lib broligarch crowd, right? The sort of the non-religious MAGA wing, although he's certainly religious, but he's not sort of on the evangelical side of things. So yeah, he's the Peter Thiel guy. Right? I always look at it as Peter Thiel's candidate.
He could be dragged down like Kamala, though. I mean, there is a closer association between the vice president than the Secretary of State, than the defense secretary, if you want to add
history shows, a vice president goes only as far as what the public thinks of the president in that election year, which is why the only one in the modern era that made it was George H.W. Bush, because Reagan had an approval rating over 60%. So, can you imagine...
Trump's at 41, according to a recent...
Can you imagine Trump even at 50% come September of 2028, right? It's hard to imagine him ever really getting below over 45. And I think for JD, I mean, that's the problem, right? It's the same problem Kamala went into. We have an electorate that's that is not satisfied, right? We continue to vote against. We're not voting for. So I don't know how JD Vance is the change candidate when you're running as the sitting vice president, right? And if you're not the change candidate in this current environment, I don't know how you win.
Well, that hurts Donald Trump Jr. and my placeholder theory that JD Vance is a placeholder for Donald Trump.
I'm with you. I think Jr., I've been asked, give me 3 finalists, and I'm always like, that could be the nominee, that if I were to do FanDuel odds. And you have to put the sitting vice president as one, right? There's just too many. There's institutional advantages that you have there. So you're going to be so you have to say Vance is the front runner. I'm a Marco skeptic, but look, proximity matters. But I usually do Vance Jr. and then I do Glenn Youngkin as my sort of non-MAGA wild card. That if there is
back to the GWB days,
if there is so if a John Cornyn can win his primary, let's say you know what I mean? Like, let's say MAGA is having
doesn't look
a
good
bad
though right now. John
Cornyn. I don't buy that he will. But let's say MAGA is on the outs and there's starting to be Republicans that start to say, maybe we need to course correct here a little bit. You'll first start to see it in these Senate primaries in 26, right? Tillis, Cassidy, Cornyn. It to me is my test of just the staying power of MAGA without Trump and whether there is a non-MAGA electorate that can push MAGA out without Trump, right? To me, if I'm Glenn Youngkin, I'm watching those 3 races very carefully. And if all 3 of those incumbents go down in primaries,
but they're always base elections. The people are riled up. I don't know. But
look, I don't buy it either, but he's got so much
like,
money.
We're sitting on our hands. We're not going out.
He's the only one with the resources that can test the premise.
All right. Well, we'll see. Okay. So we have JD Kamala 2.0. Let's talk about Marco Rubio. Who was it? Glenn Thrush has a small mammal theory about him that he can just kind of move in and out. He lays low and he sort of is amorphous in the same way. What do you think, Marco Rubio? Does he have a shot? I mean, does this decision, being the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor, and isn't he the head of the archives as well? I mean, he has a 4th job.
He's got a 4th job as well, right?
Yeah.
National Archives. Oh, he's a National Security Advisor, right?
Yeah, he's a National Security Advisor, National Archives, Secretary of State. But does all of this national security, the implications, does that fall on him as well? Does this decision?
I think 100. In fact, I think Rubio's the one at risk of owning the Iran decision. That whatever happens, that it will be assumed that Rubio was always for it, right? Because Rubio is always having to correct. He's always having to say, because he's a newer convert to this philosophy. Yeah. And so I think that Rubio has the most to lose from this, not Vance, because I think that MAGA knows, well, who's the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State versus who's the Vice President, right? So no, I think Rubio owns this, will own if we launch these strikes against Iran, I think Rubio will be considered more of an architect of it than Vance will. So, look, it could go well, and that could benefit Rubio. Let's not assume we're only, we're and this is a problem for all journalists.
But I just assume that MAGA will be pissed regardless.
I think so too, unless it goes well, right?
Unless they're able to pull off the Syria thing, where they're just like bomb out.
If it's Syria, what if it turns into that, right? And all of a sudden you've got, hey, look, there's new elections, and there seems to be somebody who's pretty moderate over there, right? Who wants to cut deals, and it turns into, then again, Iraq's turned out about as well as anybody thought it could have when you think about where we were as far as what kind of government would be there. And no American politician has ever benefited from that. So
no. And Afghanistan, I mean, but
I think Rubio pays. Now I will say this. I think Rubio is almost like, I think he's the most likely running mate for whoever is the nominee.
I think if Tulsi runs, by the way, she perhaps she can't run as a Democrat. They won't take her back. So how she pull that off? Or you think
I'll
she's
tell you this with Tulsi. I heard this from a Democrat and go, well, she was a pain in the ass when she was a Democrat, and now Republicans are learning that she's going to be a pain in the ass to them too, right?
Yeah.
She is who she is. She's not changing who she is.
Gotta respect her for that.
I do respect her for that. Even if it comes across at times a little obtuse or a little odd, but I think she is who she is. I think her belief system, it's a little bit different. It's this it's a different type of religion. Some would call it a cult that she was raised in Hawaii. And so she does certainly march to the beat of a different drummer. But I think Tulsi's more likely to be the next nominee of the Libertarian Party than she is a realistic candidate on the Republican side of the aisle. Maybe
is there anyone hiding in there that you think has a shot? I think Pete Hegseth is too much of a mess. I don't to actually.
Yeah, I'm
have
bullish.
A campaign.
I'm weird. Bullish is probably too strong of a word. I'm keeping an eye on Josh Hawley. Huh. I think he has the economic pitch down better than almost anybody of the MAGA.
He's certainly smarter than most of the people among his colleagues. I think he could be the way people used to talk up Cotton, and I just think Cotton is just too hawkish for this space. In fact, everything I hear is that the purge at the Pentagon began with a Control F search for the words cotton on staffers. Like, no Cotton staffers were to be, anybody that had connections to him were to be banned from the Pentagon, things like that. Right.
So
what about Kristi Noem? No one ever talks about her, but clearly she's trying to play the role of
Corey Lewandowski has plans for her. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, that's true.
And he's run a presidential race, and they feel like I will say this, you're right to point her out. I don't take her that seriously.
Well, I mean,
but she
a lot of people didn't take Trump seriously. She's faking it. If someone's faking it out there,
100%. She, more than any other cabinet secretary, I think, more than any other, she's trying to use it as a launching pad. She is trying. I mean, look at her. She cosplays. She does these videos all the time. I mean, she is constantly out there. You had to, look, I think people know, oh yeah, no, like nobody knew who Ali Mayorkas was. Right. And everybody, I think, and she's trying to do that. So she's certainly using this opportunity to build a brand there. And it might work to a point of she's, look, I was on the receiving end of a very sophisticated set of polls that were conducted maybe by Corey Lewandowski himself or that he paid for him, where he was making the case very strongly that she would have been the best running mate for Trump. So look, he is obsessed with getting her into the national stage. So I think you're right to point her out. I don't buy she could get there, but wow, is she working? There's no doubt nobody's working harder to use a cabinet post to try to get to the next level.
I mean, she's doing the reality TV DHS secretary.
Yeah, no.
Chuck, this was fascinating. Love having you on. I wish we could talk for another hour, but I don't know if we're Rogan level yet.
You're so disciplined.
You know what?
You're like staying to a schedule here.
I try to keep it to about half hour, 40 minutes, so people can listen on their commute. But I want to keep doing this. If you don't mind,
we should. We should. I realize that my favorite podcasts are when I get to have an updated version of a conversation I really enjoyed with a pair of people before, right? And it's like, there's no doubt. I think sometimes, and I'm sure you do this too. You're like, oh no, I want a different guest. I want a different voice. I want a different voice. And you realize, no. Sometimes bringing back voices. So I feel the same way. I mean, I had a lot of
actually, Bill Simmons gave me some really good advice, and he is the pod father creating the Ringer.
He is. What was that advice?
Boss. He said to me, Tara, don't worry about your guests. He said, don't even think about booking. Just have your friends on. He said, that's the best. He goes, people don't come to the Bill. He said, people come to the Bill Simmons show for Bill. And that is, well, I probably should edit that out because I don't want him to be pissed.
No, but what's interesting about that is I fought that at Meet the Press for a long time. And I always had people say, no, people are tuning in for the host. They're not tuning in for the guests. Guests the only guests that ever moved a number, and it's true with podcasts, are if they're like, the president or the vice president, or
a fight like what you saw between Tucker and Ted Cruz, like some fireworks.
90% of independent media, video podcasts or whatever, their traffic is based on audience's interest in the host, not the guests. I mean, Bill's right. Yeah, but I think it's true of legacy television too.
He also gets amazing bookings just because he's Bill Simmons, and they just
and that's the thing, right? If you build it, they will come, right?
Exactly.
And, you build a big enough following, and then someone's like, a presidential candidate says, "Hey, I want to sit down with you," And I think my guess is he probably turns away certain guests because he doesn't want to feel like he's shilling.
Oh yeah, no, he's definitely, he's very selective. Chuck, this was great. Can't wait to catch up with you. Hopefully not in 75 days, sooner than that.
Then let's do it sooner than that. We'll do that.
Yeah, and we'll have some more to share about our journeys together on this independent media road. I saw you join Substack. I'm subscribed.
Excellent. No, I'm just doing, and it's free, and it's always got. My mindset on that is super free. I just want to write a weekly column. And that's basically
my mindset in that is you can support my journalism by subscribing to my Substack because I'm still building right now. I don't have the Chuck Todd years behind me.
I'm in the podcast, video podcast monetization game.
Yeah.
I'm not. So that's. But I think that's the beauty of this is that you can do. I think some people, Substack's the monetizing. They use YouTube as the marketing vehicle, and some do it the other way. I'm trying the other way, and while I'm here, I might as well plug Newsphere. I hope people will check it out. It's a subscription app with a group of journalists. But I've enjoyed. That's where I did this Bannon interview. You can see it now for free. Newsphere has a YouTube channel, but it's an interesting. Look, everybody's trying the independent media. How do you monetize individual journalists, bundling journalists? Newsphere's trying the bundle model, so it'll be. I'm curious to see.
Let me know how it works out.
I will.
They actually reached out to me. I was curious.
It's a good group of people that really, I look at it as it's if you remember the old International Herald Tribune, like this really, I think has the opportunity of being, and this is news for news junkies. I'm not going to pretend it's anything other than that, meaning it's that. But if you care about what's happening around the world a lot, not a little, this is going to be a good home for you.
Okay. Well, cool. Good to know. I'll be watching. Thanks, Chuck. Thanks for listening to the Tara Palmeri Show. You can support me by following the show, subscribing, liking, commenting, sharing it, leaving a written review, and telling all your friends about it. You can go to my website, tarapalmeri.com, where you can find my exclusive reporting. You can sign up for my newsletter, The Red Letter. By becoming a paid subscriber, you can directly support my independent journalism and get my exclusives straight to your inbox. I want to thank my awesome team, producer Eric Abinate, Booker, Jane Fusco, Sarah Carney on the socials, Luke Radel, and Abby Baker. Couldn't do it without you guys. See you again soon.